Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and gender nonconforming individuals to another episode of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Today is Monday, August 14th, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. The former president, Donald John Trump, has all but told a witness who is scheduled to speak tomorrow, or to testify rather tomorrow, in Fulton County, Georgia, in what is shaping up to be the fourth indictment of the former president. Donald Trump took to Truth Social and said the following, quote, "I am reading reports that failed former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, will be testifying before the Fulton County grand jury. He shouldn't. I barely knew him, but he was, right from the beginning of this witch hunt, a nasty disaster for those looking into the election fraud that took place in Georgia." Side note, there was no fraud. Continuing on in his post to Truth Social, he said the following, quote, "He refused," speaking of Jeff Duncan, "he refused having a special session to find out what went on, became very unpopular with Republicans, and said I refused to endorse him, and fought the truth all the way. A loser. He went to FNCNN." I'm just realizing as I'm reading it what he means by FNCNN. I figured I was going to have to Google what is FNCNN. He's saying Donald Trump is so ridiculous. He's saying FNCNN. He went to CNN. Well, yes. Jeff Duncan, who was the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, actually went to CNN to respond to Donald Trump's what essentially tantamounts to a threat, telling him that he should not testify. Jeff Duncan should not testify in Fani Willis's grand jury tomorrow. And what Donald Trump is doing is tantamount to witness tampering. Listen to Jeff Duncan's reply on CNN just a few moments ago this afternoon on Monday, responding to the former president, let's just say encouraging him not to testify.
Jeff, I want to start with you and get your reaction to that social media post by Donald Trump. He's insulting you and calling you out. Do you believe he's trying to intimidate you as a witness?
Well, this close into my testimony, which is going to be tomorrow, I'm going to refrain from any comment, with the exception of saying, which was just pointed out, he did misspell my name.
And how about what you are anticipating you'll be asked about tomorrow? If you won't comment on what Trump said, can you at least give us an idea of what you're anticipating?
Well, I'm just going to answer the questions as presented to me, much like I did in the special grand jury. Whatever the questions are, to the best of my ability, I'm going to answer the questions. And, you know, this is an important part of the healing process for the Republican Party. This is painful. This may feel ugly to some, but this is part of this process, right? We've got to put these facts and figures and details and reality on display for America, specifically for Republicans to see what reality really is. And, you know, the social media game that Donald Trump has played over the years, it's shallow, right? You don't have to be any more than a few hundred characters worth of information with no facts behind it, with no details to stir the crowd. And that's certainly been his game for a number of years, and it looks like it's continuing.
It is continuing, and not just from the perspective that Jeff Duncan is talking about. Donald Trump has no respect for authority whatsoever. He has even slammed the judge that is presiding over his latest criminal case. According to Politico.com, he is testing out the resolve of Judge Tanya Chutkan, who instructed Donald Trump just Friday to refrain from quote unquote inflammatory attacks against those involved in the case. But that did not stop Donald Trump from overnight attacking that very judge, despite her very clear instructions to refrain. But of course, Donald Trump is not going to listen to any authority, especially if that authority is a black woman. And so he took to Truth Social overnight and said the following, quote, "The following truth," which is analogous to a tweet, I guess. "The following truth is a quote by a highly partisan judge, Tanya Chutkan, angrily sentencing a January 6er in October of 2022. She obviously wants me behind bars, very biased and unfair." And then he subsequently shared, this was at 12:58 in the morning, mind you, he shared this quote from Tanya Chutkan as proof that she wants him in jail. Quote, "I see the videotapes. I see the footage of the flags and the signs that people were carrying and the hats that they were wearing and the garb, and the people who mobbed that Capitol were there in fealty, in loyalty to one man, not to the Constitution, of which most of the people who come before me seem woefully ignorant, not to the ideals of this country and not to the principles of democracy. It's a blind loyalty to one person who, by the way, remains free to this day, Judge Tanya Chutkan. So this is what he shared over the weekend, despite Judge Tanya Chutkan letting him know that he needs to cease and desist with his intimidation practices. And it's not just intimidation here. He's also inflaming his support base, right? Because he's clearly not going to intimidate the judge who's in charge of these cases, the judges who are in charge of these cases. Listen to this clip from ABC's Sunday morning show entitled This Week. They had Georgia election official George Sterling speaking about this exact concern.
Are you concerned that Trump's words, and it's not just that ad, it's obviously much more than just that. Are you concerned, once again, that we could see violence as a result of the former president's words?
Obviously, at this point, you never know what's going to happen. My biggest concern for years now, and I've said this at elections conferences where we get professionals who run elections around this country, is somebody will be motivated by some of this kind of language at some point and do something stupid. It's not going to be an organized thing. It's not going to be a bunch of conspirators together. It's going to be one probably mentally unstable individual who's going to be radicalized through this process, and that's my biggest concern for this.
Yeah, well, here's where I disagree with Mr. Sterling. I disagree because we have already seen the organized conspirators that came in the form of fraudulent electors out of Michigan, fraudulent electors across several states. We had the actual January 6ers who showed up at the Capitol. We have the slow going coup that's ongoing, headed up by former General Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor for Donald Trump. So these activities are still highly coordinated, and they do involve multiple conspirators, but that doesn't negate what he's saying in terms of the possibility of one wild lone wolf who will act out on this violence. So it really is a very dangerous thing and time in which we live for the former president of the United States, who has thousands, if not millions of people who pledge their fealty to him, use this type of language against our system of justice, against the people who are charged with holding him accountable. Donald Trump is making it almost impossible to hold him accountable. Now, of course, we expect that from Donald Trump because that's who he is. Did anyone expect for a moment that he would go quietly? He had the right to remain silent. In fact, he was instructed to remain silent. And what did he do? He's attacking people out of the case in Georgia. He's attacking people out of the case in Washington, D.C. He's attacking the team from Jack Smith's team that's not only in Washington, D.C., but he's attacking the team that's prosecuting him in Miami. And of course, he's attacking Alvin Bragg and the prosecutors there in New York City. So Donald Trump refuses to go quietly into the night. He refuses to be held accountable without causing as much destruction and damage as he possibly can. And the ultimate problem is that we have not only millions of Americans, and I don't want to make it seem like they're more than they are. They're not the majority of Americans, but they are a very vocal and a very dangerous minority of Americans who will support Donald Trump through this ridiculousness. They will stand by him no matter what he does. And that is dangerous. But it's also dangerous because we do have a media infrastructure that still supports him. We still have a Republican Party that can't get away from him. And so this man, Donald Trump, who has the country on the verge of violence constantly, he is so entrenched in our political system. And there are so many people who benefit off of him being in our political system, but he is like a virus. He is like a virus that this country has contracted as a result of the Republican Party getting in bed with a charlatan and elevating him, a racist charlatan, and elevating him all the way to the White House. And it's because Republicans will do literally anything for power, even sell their soul to the devil that is Donald J. Trump. We'll be back with more of the Benjamin Dixon Show right after this break.
I'm in sync with the earth, 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let her ties in the hearse.
to The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Yep.
Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Last week, we covered the fact that Attorney General Merrick Garland has assigned a special counsel to continue the investigation into Hunter Biden. Special counsel David Weiss, who was already heading up the investigation into Hunter Biden, requested last Tuesday that he be granted special counsel status. And he was granted that status by Merrick Garland's Department of Justice. And remember how I said that there's nothing that the Republicans aren't willing to turn on, despite all of the evidence showing that they used to stand for it. I gave you the example of Romney Care and the Heritage Foundation. They created Obamacare. But as soon as Barack Obama said, okay, let's do Obamacare, what did these idiots do? They all of a sudden distanced themselves from Obamacare. Well, it's the same exact thing with this special counsel, David Weiss, the appointment. The Republicans, 34 of them, in fact, 34 Republicans signed on to a letter that they sent to Attorney General Merrick Garland requesting that David Weiss himself be appointed special counsel privileges so that he can investigate Hunter Biden. What does Merrick Garland do? He grants their wish. What do those same Republicans who signed on it, including Ted Cruz, Marsha Blackburn, and a few others, what do? They immediately turned and attacked David Weiss as an illegitimate appointee that is going to be in bed with the Biden administration. I kid you not. The very people who requested David Weiss be granted special counsel privileges are now attacking that very same special counsel. I'm sorry, but in what universe can literally anything be accomplished when people like that remain in power? Here's Ted Cruz attacking the very person he requested be assigned special counsel.
Well, this appointment is camouflage and it's cover up. I think it's disgraceful. Listen, David Weiss was the U.S. attorney handpicked to lead this investigation, who spent the last 5 years covering it up. He is a wildly inappropriate person to be a special counsel.
Really, Ted Cruz? Because just a year ago, September 2022, you, along with about 30 other Republicans, requested David Weiss specifically be granted special counsel privileges. But now you're accusing him of being an active participant in covering up this criminality, this alleged criminality. This shouldn't be surprising, but this is the level of hypocrisy that we are dealing with on the national level. I mean, it's not just Ted Cruz. Senator Marsha Blackburn, who also signed on to the very same letter. This is what she said on Twitter, quote, Merrick Garland appointed David Weiss as special counsel because he knows Weiss will protect Hunter. She was so egregious that she got hit with a community note that was, eviscerated her. It said the following, quote, Marsha Blackburn was one of 34 Republican senators that specifically requested David Weiss be extended special counsel protections and authorities to conduct the Hunter Biden investigation. So what gives? Well, what gives is that we have a group of political leaders who have no reservation and no hesitation about gaslighting and outright lying to the American people. Here is Senator Ron Johnson, who is another Republican, who also signed on to the same letter requesting the same person, David Weiss, and now he's attacking David Weiss.
Obviously, U.S. Attorney Weiss has no intention of holding Hunter Biden or any of his family members, including President Biden, who is corrupt, who has lied repeatedly to the American public. That is a fact. We know it. He has no intention of holding them accountable. We needed an independent prosecutor here in some way, shape, or form. He's probably the least independent individual that Merrick Garland could have appointed.
What gives? What gives is that this is yet another important data point in the reality that Republicans will turn on anything if it gives them a single day's advantage in the news cycle. And they don't care how many receipts we have. They don't care how many people know that they're lying. They don't care if they're hypocrites. In fact, they honestly do not care if they disadvantage and cripple the United States of America if that's what they need to do to get the power or even just to get the next news cycle. Because a lot of times they don't even get victories out of these lies. They just get a winning talking point to survive the news cycle. And look at Tommy Tuberville. We'll talk about what he's doing to the military coming up later on today's episode. But when you have this breed of human being, and I use that term human being very loosely here, when you have this level of liar, this level of habitual, sadistic liars who will change any of their positions, they will turn on any policy, they will lie even to their mother, they will lie about their mothers. They will swear on their dead grandparent, they will swear on their children knowing that they're lying. Okay, they would be like, oh, my mama's grave, knowing that their mama's good and dead if it was left up to their lies. Those are the type of people we're dealing with. Now, answer me this question. Can you even live in a personal household with someone who would gaslight you and lie to you like that? Now imagine a household of 330 million Americans who are underneath the control of people who have no morals whatsoever. That is the time in which we live.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions. Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yep. Welcome back. I want to read to you, before we go to the next story, I want to read to you a brief segment of an article from Politico that I think perfectly encapsulates the problem with dealing with people who have no moral direction. Their only guide and their only direction in life is to oppose anything the other person does, right? This is kind of what we described in both segment 1 and segment 2. The fact that Republicans will turn on any policy so long as it lets them remain in the opposition because they know how to weaponize being in the opposition very effectively. Well, it's not only just a strategy, but it has seeped down to even some of their supporters. And here's a section from an article by Politico discussing some of what Biden did in terms of climate change. And when a Trump supporter heard about the policy itself, they were like, that's a great idea. As soon as they found out the very next breath that it was implemented by Joe Biden, he immediately, a guy by the name, I'm not making up this name, this is his name, Bill McAnally, he immediately turned on Joe Biden. And no, he actually immediately turned on the idea. And while I'm laughing at his last name, because at the core of me, I'm still a 12-year-old, it is a very sad indictment of where we are politically, that we are dealing with not just a political party that does this, but the rank and file supporters of the Republican Party who have no moral guidepost. Here's the passage from Politico. Quote, here's his name again, Bill McAnally, a self-declared Trump fan, was ecstatic when an Italian company, Enel, announced plans in May to spend more than $1 billion, the largest private investment in the state's history, to build a solar cell and panel manufacturing facility a half-hour drive east of Tulsa. He owns a diner that is one of the few restaurants around Enola, a town home to 1,500 people, and stands to see sales jump from the influx of new customers. It's a great deal, said McAnally, 68-year-old, since Enel, through its affiliate 3Sun USA, expects to generate 1,000 manufacturing jobs in 2025. All it does is help my business. But when told by a reporter that Enel plans to take advantage of tax credits included in Biden's climate law, McAnally abruptly changed his tune. I don't support it now, he said. The federal government doesn't need to get involved. We all support bringing in green, but we don't want to give them all this free money. How do you navigate that type of mentality? How do you negotiate with that? How do you triangulate? How can you be bipartisan with someone or an ideology that refuses to have any moral grounding? But their only position is, I will oppose you no matter what, even if it's something that I like, even if it's something that I could benefit from. If a Democrat does it and I can benefit from it, they would rather lose out on that benefit than to acknowledge that a Democrat did something for them. That is completely untenable. We cannot work with those type of people. We cannot, it becomes impossible. And so what happens is you have Democrats who are running around all day long trying to pacify people who by definition refuse to be pacified. They refuse to be satisfied. They refuse to compromise. They make it completely and totally impossible. So what do you do in that type of situation? Well, you get rid of the people in power who govern like that. And you make sure that nobody else gets into power who can govern like that. Here's our difficulty. It's the entire Republican Party. The entire Republican Party have agreed. They have decided, without whether it was written down, whether they did it at a conference or not, they took each other's cues and said the best way for us to engage politically is disingenuously, is in bad faith, to turn on any policy, no matter what, no matter how much we support it, we will turn on every policy if the Democrats support it. Because it's not about actually accomplishing policy. It's about opposing the Democratic Party at all costs, even at their own expense, even at the expense of the United States of America. I want to take you over to Mississippi. Trigger warning, this next story is heart-wrenching and involves sexual assault. There's an article in time.com that explores the story of Ashley, a 13-year-old girl from Clarksdale, Mississippi, who became pregnant after being raped in her front yard. Ashley's mother, named Regina, stated that she noticed some changes in her behavior after the assault, but didn't initially know what had happened. And so the pregnancy went unnoticed until severe vomiting. And at that point, when they went to the doctor, they found out that she was pregnant and she was about 10 or 11 weeks pregnant. Now, in the past, Ashley could have obtained an abortion due to her circumstances, even in the state of Mississippi. But since Mississippi has already banned most abortions after 15 weeks, her options were limited. And the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson overturned abortion rights, overturned Roe versus Wade. So the neighboring state had already banned abortions as well. So this left young Ashley, 13-year-old, with very few, if any, options. And her closest option would have been to drive 9 hours to Chicago for her to get an abortion. But that didn't happen because it was logistically and financially impossible for her family. And so ultimately what happened is that this 13-year-old child ended up giving birth to the child of her rapist. And I want to read directly from time.com because I think the author, particularly in the last 3 paragraphs, really said something that we should all consider. Quote, for Regina, who is Ashley's mother, the arrival of her first grandchild has not eased the pain of watching what her daughter has endured. This situation hurts the most because it was an innocent child doing what children do, playing outside, and it was my child, Regina says. It still hurts, and it's going to always hurt. Ashley doesn't know anybody else who has a baby. She doesn't want her 3 friends at school to find out that she has one now. Regina is working on an arrangement with the school so Ashley can start 7th grade from home until she's ready to go back in person. Relatives will watch Peanut, that's the child, while Regina is at work. Is there anything about motherhood that Ashley is excited about? She twists her mouth, shrugs, and says nothing. Is there anything Ashley wants to say to other girls? Quote, be careful when you go outside, she says, and stay safe. There's only one moment when Ashley smiles a little, and it's when she describes the nurses she met at the doctor's office. There's only one moment that Ashley smiles a little, and it's when she describes the nurses she met in the doctor's office and the delivery room. One of them, she remembers, was nice and cool. She has decided that when she grows up, she wants to be a nurse too, to help other people, she says. For a second, she looks like any other soon-to-be 7th grader sharing her childhood dream. Then Peanut stirs in his car seat. Regina says he needs to be fed. Ashley's face goes blank again. She's a mother now. 13-year-old, going into the 7th grade, already a victim of sexual assault, being forced to give birth to the child of her rapist because of the decision made by the Supreme Court, which is, as Jamel Bowie of the New York Times said, this is not a bug of the decision. This is a feature. This is the intended consequences that conservatives expect the children who have been assaulted to carry the child of their rapist. That is because we're dealing with a group of men in particular who have no regard for the life and the value of women, and certainly have no regard for the life and the value of young girls. In fact, she's old enough in their minds, in the minds of conservatives, to be a mother, to be a child bride even. So why should they care if she's forced to carry the child of her rapist? In actuality, they don't. And this is the dark and draconian world in which we currently live. And I would warn you that they want to make it worse because they firmly believe that the world should operate just like this, that a 7th grader, 13-year-old child should be forced to give birth to the child of her rapist. Heaven help us as we help ourselves out of this barbaric situation. One last story before we go to our patrons only episode, patreon.com/the BPD show. If you want access to it, it's not just the state of Florida, but now Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is the child of nepotism. Mike Huckabee's daughter, who is now the governor of Arkansas, has withdrawn approval for the AP African American Studies course from the high school curriculum due to a new law prohibiting certain topics. Now, yes, those topics include so-called critical race theory, which we all know was never taught on the grade school level. It is a theoretical concept that was taught at the graduate level, wasn't even taught at the undergrad level, but that didn't stop people like Ronald Dion DeSantis from making a boogeyman out of it and banning it in the state of Florida. And now Sarah Huckabee Sanders is following suit in the state of Arkansas. The decision coincided with the return of thousands of students to school this week. And the African American Studies course is still being worked on, but they targeted it specifically because of their concerns around it violating their LEARNS Act. The LEARNS Act is their local version of the Stop Woke Act in Florida, right? The LEARNS Act was passed by the General Assembly, including a ban on teaching critical race theory. And again, like I've already stated, no one has taught critical race theory on the grade school level, but that has not stopped them from getting critical mass and using it to stop the teaching of Black history, period. Now, remember, when this happened in the state of Florida, the College Board announced revisions to the course following criticisms, and they removed topics like Black Lives Matter and reparations. So this, again, is 100% about attacking Black history, Black culture, and Black progress. And there's really no other way to cut it. I'm going to dig more into this in the patrons only episode, I want you to go to patreon.com/the BPD show, because there's a lot to talk about on this topic, along with more Christian nationalists who are, there's one in particular who's apologizing for ever supporting Vivek Ramaswamy. Last week, we covered the fact that Republicans are attacking him because of his faith. That doesn't stop Vivek from doing everything he can to get the white evangelical vote by attacking as many black people as possible. Right? But they don't want him. Patreon.com/the BPD show. Everyone else, I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.